Hi everyone. I had asked for this podium, but I'm so broken open by the amazing work of Sarah and Kayla. I actually appreciate sort of vulnerability of not having a podium between you and me. So thank you for what you guys did. And thank you to my hosts. University of Michigan is my beloved alma mater, and a lot of things started for me here, and it's a great privilege to give something back by coming here and sharing some of my writing with you, especially when the audience is filled with people such as my mentor and advisor, John Vandermeer, and my other mentor and advisor, Keith Taylor, from whom I learned so much politics and ecology and poetry. So I hope my words are worthy of all that. Here we go. When dust falls into water, it changes its name to silt. 400,000 million years ago, a mountain range located where the Catskills now stand eroded and turned to dust that was carried in wind and sank into a shallow, nameless sea that coursed over New York, stretching to what is now Ohio. I live above what was the north shore of that ancient ocean, the South Shore, West Virginia. Dust wafted over and became silt and sank to the bottom so long ago. These creatures that sank had no eyeballs or 3 or 4 chambered hearts, no backbones, no gills, no breasts, no milk, no eyeballs. They were sea lilies and squid. Their bodies too sank. The silt became a graveyard and a cemetery, with one key difference. There were no land plants yet on the planet. There was less oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere, less oxygen in the Earth's seas, and so decomposition worked differently. And so the corpses of these animals became bubbles of methane, and time passed. And like a petrified fizz of champagne bubbles, silt changed its name again to shale and became a chalkboard 150 feet thick under our New York feet, full of trapped bubbles of methane. Above them, other layers, limestone. Above them, aquifers from which we drink. That's the subterranean landscape, our basement cellar that no one has ever laid eyes on. So I'm reading to you now, not even from a draft, but notes toward my next book project, Unfractured, which is poetry in the service of science. And I don't dare ever read from my pre-draft notes to anyone, but it's actually useful for me to do this. So I'll kind of keep going with this a little bit. What I'm trying to do with this new book is actually reveal, deploy the best writing of nature writing, which usually describes landscapes here at the sunlit surface of the Earth, and describe what nobody ever sees in the subterranean underworld of our planet, which is where all of our fossil fuel reserves lie. So I want to make that visible, and I'm taking as my model Rachel Carson, who wrote a trilogy of sea books before she became the author of Silent Spring, which is her polemical book. But before that, she wrote these lovingly descriptive books about the ocean that became bestsellers and were really fascinating to people precisely because while she was writing them in the 40s and 50s, there were no sort of Nova specials and bathyspheres that could go down and show us what this landscape looked like. So she used language and strung sentences together to create verbal pictures, imagery, so that we could imagine how the ocean kind of worked. And so I'm trying to do that in the terrestrial underworld. And the conflict in this book, because all books need conflict, is basically the human conflict of our time. And the outcome of this conflict basically determines our entire fate, whether we avoid these runaway tipping points of climate change or we don't. So the question is whether or not we are going to redesign this underworld by blowing it apart and pulling the fossil fuels out of it and lighting them on fire, which we've been doing for 150 years, or whether we're going to hashtag leave them in the ground, right? And so I'm trying to I'm doing a lot of reading now of other kind of epic battles that involve underworld forces and mythologies to kind of get to play on some of the ideas already embedded in our culture about the world down underneath our feet, the fire, the brimstone, hell itself, and so on. So, of course, these fossil fuels are kind of come in and they come in three flavors: the unholy trinity of coal, oil, and natural gas. And the 150 years of radically altering the surface landscape because of our combustion of these three substances is the story of our lifetimes. So I'm interested in exploring the radical changes to the landscape that are created by bringing these substances up and igniting them. I'm interested in thinking about the underworld as a place where, as a cemetery where all these Devonian organisms lie, either in a crunchy incarnation as coal, in gooey incarnation as petroleum oil, or in their vaporous form, natural gas or methane, that kind of Father, Son, and Holy Ghost of fossil fuels. At the same time, I'm interested in exploring the underworld not just as a graveyard, but as an actual living ecosystem. So here's some early writing I've done about that. Suppose we found out that the radioactive magma-warmed rocks miles below our feet housed complex community of organisms. What if we knew that the planet's mineral underworld, symbol of everything dead, devoid, inert, and unresponsive, was actually an ecosystem, a kind of underground coral reef, and as such was part of the biosphere? And to pursue this, I'm actually studying this kind of obscure field called geomicrobiology, which reveals to us that there are actually living organisms living in deep geological strata. There are bacteria, there are fungi, but a lot of them are from this ancient domain of life called archaea. And we first knew about them from a paper published in 1940 from Azerbaijan that discovered that this water that bubbled up from a deep oil well actually contained organisms that nobody had ever seen before. And when they were cultured in the lab, they turned out to be archaea. And so that was our first glimpse that what's going on down there is metabolically alive. And if that's true, then the biosphere must be said to extend a mile or more into the dark part of the planet, which I think is a new idea, at least for those of us who were trained as biologists. When I'm almost 60. I mean, the idea is that the biosphere exists at the living surface of the Earth, and it's all run on photosynthesis. So even the fish poop that falls into the abyss of the deep, dark ocean originally started with photosynthetic phytoplankton, right? And so it can all kind of trace back to that. But the idea of deep life organisms actually kind of upends that whole idea. So here's some more research I did on these guys. Fungal filaments and bacteria not only are ubiquitously present in deep rock layers like dolomite and gneiss, they seem to be playing an active role in making them. In other words, the biological is the creator of the geological. Or in the bland language of science, quote, microbial life plays an important role in the formation of rocks, which are generally considered to have formed abiotically. The discovery of so-called deep life and the subsequent recognition that ultra-subterranean organisms are, like everybody else, actively altering their habitats to suit themselves, was mostly greeted by blank stares, both within and without the world of science. But the paradigm-shifting findings keep piling up. Underworld microbes, such as archaea, can join together to form highly organized colonies. In place of electron transport systems, they grow electrically conductive nanowires and transfer electrons into the minerals around them. Many use hydrogen as an energy source. At least one runs on the energy released through radioactive decay. Some have arsenic instead of phosphorus in their DNA. And then this. By weight, more than half of all life on Earth likely lies within deep geological strata. And then this. As a major player in element cycling, deep life may be contributing to climate stability. So I kind of stumbled upon this because I am a science advisor to organizations that are trying to ban fracking. So I explain fracking as a process in lots of different fora and testify about it to the EPA and to state houses and congressional briefings and so forth. And one of the things that needs explaining is why fracking fluid is so necessarily toxic. On average, about 50 to 90 gallons of glutaraldehyde or some other kind of complete nasty biocide is poured down the hole when you frack. And why is that? And the problem for which these biocides are the solution is called biofouling. It means that these archaea will fill up the pipes and form biofilms during the fracking process and interfere with the flow of gas. So essentially we're conducting sort of massive pesticide spraying of this underground ecosystem in order to even to extract the hydrocarbons out of it. And in doing so, we put our drinking water at risk. And then we have all this fracking waste that's highly toxic that there's no known way of turning that poison water back into potable drinking water again. And so to study some of this, I actually went to Yellowstone National Park, which is the one place on Earth you can see archaea at the surface, because the magma there is so close to the surface that there are all these bubbling pools. So I spent a lot of time walking through the geyser basin just to get some visual imagery of what archaea look like. And there really is a lot of fire and brimstone right at the surface, right? So I was taking all that in. And one of the things I learned while I was there was that, I'm speaking now to my fellow biologists out there, the rest of you can kind of float through this part of it, the talk, that a lot of these archaea they float as sheets, right? It's these same complex colonies that normally you don't get to see because they're down below our feet on the geyser basin are floating as sheets. And it was actually a heat-stable enzyme, which was presumed once to be impossible, right? Because enzymes denature so easily, that was isolated, that paved the way for polymerase chain reaction, which is that nifty technique where you can generate multiple copies of DNA for research. So a lot of you who might use that technique in the lab, that polymerase enzyme was actually isolated from one of these deep life organisms, and but it was discovered in the Yellowstone geyser basins. So that seems really cool. So that's going to be in the book somewhere. All right. So bringing together thinking of this as a living ecosystem, but also a graveyard, this subterranean world of ours, is kind of what I'm working on. And I often, when I'm doing pre-writing exercises, getting ready to write chapters, I write actual poetry, and then that I sample from to create kind of prose poetry. And so this is a poem I wrote as an ode to the shale in New York, addressing it directly, which I'm not going to do it in my book, but this is how it came out in poetry. And the name of all these shale layers, and you have them here in Michigan, all have different names. The name of the ancient ocean floor that became the shale bedrock of New York is called the Marcellus Shale. And I got really interested in that word. Marcellus is the name of an ancient Roman general who was renowned for his cunning military strategies. And General Marcellus ultimately perished on the battlefield. He was run through by a spear, which I thought, I could use that. And Marcellus reappears as a character in Hamlet, where being run through by spears is not uncommon. And in Shakespeare's telling, Marcellus is the career officer who utters that memorable line about something rotten in the state of Denmark, which also seems useful to me. So here's Marcellus. I guess the other thing I want to mention is that when this dust from all the eroded mountains settles into the ancient oceans and form the ocean floor, mountains contain whole periodic chart of elements, including heavy metals, and those also fell into these ancient oceans, including here in Michigan, which is why these deep geological strata contain arsenic, lead, uranium, and they're deposited depending on the currents and where the deep troughs were, so they're not scattered uniformly down there, but they're clustered, right? And so when you bring fracking fluid up, not only do you bring up all these very powerful biocides that you use to kill off all the living organisms, but you, and of course you're bringing up the fossil fuels, but you're bringing up all these heavy metals at the same time. So that found its way into this poem. So did a scrap of one of my favorite line from Julius Caesar. Oh, pardon me, thou bleeding piece of earth, that I am meek and gentle with these butchers. So that's iambic pentameter, because that's how Shakespeare writes. I actually wrote this in hip-hop rhythm. That's how it came out. But then you'll hear the switch to Shakespearean rhythm, which is why it's not really a successful poem, but it's an amalgamation of a bunch of stuff I'm going to use. It's raw material for something else. So here it is, Marcellus, for Allen Ginsberg. Marcellus below us, Marcellus below us, Marcellus, tell us, who are you? Older than fishes, older than spinal cord and bone and the green day of trees, older than pollen dust, than seeds. Bedrock of grief, subterranean coral reef, microbe and nanowire, electrically conductive hypersaline fire, alive. Marcellus, our cellar, Marcellus, unlike us, fissured and fossiled sarcophagus of sea lilies, squid, ego and id, the whole periodic table in you, uranium, radium, barium, lead, Marcellus, home of the dead, toluene, mercury, benzene, brine, arsenic, the river Styx, 500 million years thick. In you, Eurydice, Hades, Moloch, Charon's boat, Hades, Moloch, ransom note. Marcellus deserved the name given him who waged war and gained fame for the sacking of Syracuse for the Battle of Gaul, only to lose to the enemy at home and fall, no exit plan. Some say your success was embellished. General Marcellus, tell us, who called you the sword of Rome? Saudi Arabia below our feet, a prolific monster, says Wall Street, a sure thing, a shale play, place your bet. Enter now Mark Antony, breaking bread with Bobby Kennedy, jealous et tu, Marcellus. Oh, pardon me, thou bleeding piece of earth, that I am meek and gentle with these butchers. Hades, Moloch, Charon's boat, Hades, Moloch, ransom note. Marcellus, who are we? Drill, syringe, derrick, vein. Two junkies argue. How many atoms of carbon dance on the head of a pin? Marcellus, quick, tell us, I hear the trucks. They're not far. The plan is to reduce you to rubble. There is no Hubble telescope for you. No 24-hour spill cam for us. Are you a box inscribed with the name Pandora? Or a scroll on which are written the names of us all? Holy the rock, and the fissure, and the salt, and the diatoms fall. Holy the unfractured, holy the wall between you and us, Marcellus. Holy the cave, holy the soluble, holy the hall. Holy the unmapped and abandoned well. Hell, I know you're down there. Mom always said, don't blow up the basement. Hades, Moloch, Charon's boat, Hades, Moloch, ransom note. Let me love you from a long way up. Holy the water, holy the cup.
Nope.
So all my background in the Methodist Sunday School kind of comes out there at the end. All right, so then the book kind of takes the reader down to the center of the earth, right? And to this part of the world you can't see. And then I go up to the atmosphere, to the stratosphere, to tell a story of climate change, which is not invisible in the sense that we can all see the sky, but the chemistry of what's going on is invisible, so the writerly task is a little bit different than trying to describe a subterranean landscape that we've really never seen. But so now I'm going to try to describe molecules to my readers. The idea being that extracting this stuff deep from the center of the Earth has an effect on the chemistry of the heavens and the firmament way above, right? So there's going to be kind of a play between earth and air, and fire and water are all going to kind of be in there somehow too, in ways I haven't quite figured out yet. So, these are some, I'm going to go back to reading my notes toward this draft. We live on a planet that circles the sun, and the sun gives us two forms of energy. It gives us heat and light. And when the face of the sun turns, the face of our Earth turns away from the sun, and it's night, the light energy entirely disappears, but the heat energy does not. Some of it remains. Our atmosphere contains many gases: nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, methane. The nitrogen and the oxygen can't hold the heat in for us, but carbon dioxide and methane can, and it serves as a kind of blanket that gets us through the night. Otherwise, our planet would resemble the Disney movie Frozen. The oceans would turn to skating rinks each night. Our blood plasma would turn to ice. That doesn't happen because there are molecules that vibrate when they are struck with thermal radiation. And their molecules happen to be bonded together in such a way that when heat bouncing off the Earth's surface from the sun heads back out into outer space, these molecules vibrate when they're struck. And those vibrations create heat, and they keep us warm all night long and get us through the night. That's why we don't freeze to death every single night. There are two gases that do this for us: carbon dioxide and methane. During the industrial age, when we shoveled fossil fuels into ovens, we have increased the amount of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere by 40%. We've increased the amount of methane in our atmosphere by more than a factor of 3. Methane only lasts for a dozen or so years in the atmosphere, but it's 86 times more powerful than carbon dioxide at trapping heat. Carbon dioxide is not as potent a heat-trapping gas, but it lasts for 100 years, which means that our breath outlasts us. If you take a breath and breathe out, your carbon dioxide from your metabolizing body has changed the chemistry of the atmosphere, and that exhaled breath will remain long after you are underneath the ground. And that legacy that you leave, all of your breathing, keeps the Earth warm at night and allows other life forms to live. So thus do the dead allow the living to go on living. When we load up the atmosphere with heat-trapping gases like carbon dioxide, a couple of things happen out in the ocean. The carbon dioxide turns into carbonic acid when it lands in the water. And so it has made our oceans 1/3 more acid. That's a problem for the phytoplankton. It's also a problem for the zooplankton, because the zooplankton represent the larval forms of stuff that, when they're grown-ups, secrete shells made of calcium carbonate. And we're rapidly now approaching the pH by which calcium carbonate will go into solution. When that happens, and then things like barnacles and coral reefs don't have babies, and we run out of zooplankton, the basis of the whole food chain in the ocean. But the phytoplankton are also in trouble. They're out there floating around with their brethren, the zooplankton, because 93% of the heat, excess heat that is trapped by these heat-trapping gases, is absorbed by ocean water, and we're warming the surface of the ocean such that upwellings can no longer bring nutrients. Fish poop, which is a miracle grow for the phytoplankton. And the phytoplankton are now in decline by about 1 to 2% a year. Take a breath, you breathe in a pint of atmosphere with every inhalation. Half of the oxygen in that breath come to you from land plants, and the other half come to you from the world's plankton stocks. So you breathe in once and you thank the trees, and you breathe in again and you thank the plankton. So if the world's plankton are in trouble, we are also in trouble. Our fate is intertwined. So there'll be some kind of language where I make that connection visible for people. All right, that's pre-writing, those are my notes. So I'm also an activist. You heard that I went to jail. I've gone to jail 3 times for extended periods of time. I have 1 charge that I'm still facing, so I'm not sure how that's going to play out. Going to jail is another ecosystem that nobody sees. It's the last place you can't live tweet from. There's no cameras in there. So our ideas about what jail is like is kind of based on Hollywood movies of what jails are. And so people are making decisions about whether they could stand to go to jail. What would be the issue that you would be willing to go to jail for? That's a kind of question I think that is an interesting one for our own discernment. But when we try to imagine, could we tolerate being in jail? Like, what would it be like? We don't really have, it's hard to imagine what it looks like, right? And so that's the 3rd ecosystem I want to describe. It's invisible for people. So taken down to the bottom of the earth, up into the chemistry of the atmosphere, on the surface of the ocean, and then into a jail cell, telling a story about these civil disobedience movements that are now arising as people rise up to defend the integrity of the bedrock, the integrity of the firmament, and try to stabilize the climate, what people are willing to do. And so kind of bear witness from jail. So I'll close with this piece, and then my timing's right, we'll have just enough time to show a short video, which is the film Unfractured. And the filmmaker was able to get her work done before I got mine done, so the film is actually going to come out ahead of the book. The film takes a slightly different tack because film is about human drama, so it actually tells the story of how we banned fracking in New York State, the role that I played as a scientist in service to this movement, and my incarceration. But because we couldn't take the camera into jail, it was mostly about my arrest and my trial and so forth. So you see me in handcuffs. But the actual lived experience of being in jail is going to have to only be narrated by language, because there's no pictures of that. So that's how the book and the film will be different. There is no coffee in the Chemung County Jail. There used to be coffee, but the new sheriff put a stop to that. So said the women of cell block 5D at about 6:30 a.m. I had become a woman of cell block 5D at about 3:30 a.m., so the coffee situation caught my attention. The Chemung County Jail is located in Elmira, which is situated wholly within the Chemung River floodplain along New York's border with Pennsylvania. The city is otherwise most famous for repeated floods and for its notorious prison camp. Fully 1/4 of the 12,000 captured Confederate soldiers died here during the final months of the Civil War. My fellow inmates looked in at me through the bars of my cell and continued their briefing. Until tested for tuberculosis, all incoming prisoners are classified as keep lock, which is to say they have to remain inside their cells. New admits can end up in 24/7 keep lock for up to 15 business days, pursuant to 7013.8 of the New York Penal Code. 15 days was the entire length of my sentence. Look, said an inmate named Nadine, we'll be bringing you meals and stuff. What do you need? There are no clocks in the Chemung County Jail, and the fluorescent lights stay on all night. And so time was emancipated. In my 6 by 7 foot cell, time escaped and spilled over everything. It ran wild and unmetered. I breathed time into my lungs. I ate time. I read time. Whatever I was doing time. I was drunk with it, rich with it. I had enough time for once. Occasionally, I heard church bells and counted the hours. But a more reliable timekeeper was the window across the cell block, separated from me by 2 catwalks and 2 rows of bars. Its glass had been painted over, and I could not see beyond it to the outside world. And yet each evening, the April light pushed through the panes, paint and all, and a diffuse ray of light entered my cell. No, it wasn't really a ray of light. It was a cloud of light. Its daily arrival was grace itself. I watched hard as the sun cloud glided across the near wall of my cell to the back wall, and then slid along the blank far wall. One evening, I placed my body inside this cloud and moved with it. It was while standing against the illuminated far wall that I noticed the word. Just like that, I saw it. I was staring at a letter E. There was no mistaking it. And there was another E just to the left of the first one, and other different letters to the left of those. Each letter was about 8 inches high. not drawn or engraved, but somehow pressed into the steel wall itself. Only the faint play of sunlight allowed me to see them. I ran my fingers over each indented letter. I read it by Braille. The word was not about God. The word was not about fornication. The word was coffee. Civil disobedience is like Planned Parenthood. The second word in the phrase doesn't exactly align with the first one. Disobedience, civil, parenthood, plan. You search your conscience, you reach a decision, you make preparations, you talk about your decision and your preparations to meaningful ways to all concerned, and then comes the time for action. You leave a condom in the drawer, and 12 years later, your presence is required at a pet band performance in a middle school gymnasium. The property taxes on your mortgaged home help to pay for this. While there's a clear causal connection between A and B, you wouldn't exactly call it a plan. Or you might refuse the deputy's third order to get off the driveway, the one owned by the nation's largest natural gas and transport company, the one with a truck with a massive drill head strapped to its flatbed. He wants to drive on it, right now. And you might have strong spiritual and biological feelings about drinking water and the possible folly of storing explosive hydrocarbon gases from fracking operations next to and beneath it. And because you planned parenthood, you now have a child who depends on that water and the air above it, and you spend summer nights at a 4-H camp near the railroad tracks along which the explosive gases are to be transported. And even though you've testified and written letters and submitted expert comments, the company might go on violating environmental laws, polluting the lake, blithely paying fines, and planning for expansion. And so, because you believe strongly in the sanctity of water and loons and the beauty of the boy who plays percussion in the pet band because he broke his jaw in a bicycle accident, he had to give up the trumpet, here you are in cell block 5D, far removed from lakes and loons and pet bands. The new skill you have acquired for Earth Day is how to safely descend a set of stairs and ankle manacles and handcuffs. The letter from the pet band percussionist said, "Mom, I'm really popular now on account of you being arrested." Nadine laughed. "You gangsta mama now." All right, I'm going to close then with Unfractured, the trailer for the upcoming film. So this is having its world premiere. It was actually selected to be the lead film at the gala opening of the Toronto Documentary Film Festival in a couple weeks. So I'll actually be traveling up to Toronto for that with the filmmaker. And then after that, we'll have some premieres here in the United States. And I truly look forward to being able to bring it here to Ann Arbor someday soon. So here's Unfractured. The film takes place on the surface of the earth, and it's about the human drama of all this.
My name is Sandra Steingraber, and I am Unfractured. Yes, we are back, and we will keep coming back until fracking is stopped in New York.
We won't stop until Governor Cuomo protects our health and our environment.
This morning, I said goodbye to my sweetheart in room 438 of the Medical Center. I'm here today speaking for both of us.
Fracking brings temporary profits to a few and permanent ruin for many.
There is not a single case in this country where the hydraulic fracturing process has polluted a groundwater supply. Not a single one.
I was sitting there, 2 pages worth of studies showing thousands of cases of water contamination. I'd like to say I never disappoint my kids. I disappoint my kids. I almost feel like I'm dealing with an 85-year-old instead of somebody in his 50s, you know? My heart's broken in 1,000 pieces right now. This is what my country has brought. You know, the antidote to despair and cynicism is to fight with your whole heart.
So people risking arrest, red armbands.
Today we are letting our bodies speak because we have tried our voices. Today our bodies are delivering the message.
If we need to fill these jails
ourselves with our bodies to stop this plant, we are ready to take that tactic.
Give away the plot of the film. We all in New York banded together and fought for 2.5 years, built up a huge social movement that carried the science into the governor's office, and we have a permanent ban on fracking now in New York. The greatest honor of my life to serve as a science advisor for that movement, and it really was well, I was the lucky recipient of a Heinz Award in 2011 for my earlier research and writing on environmental health, and that $100,000 check became the seed money to start the coalition called New Yorkers Against Fracking. We started out with 5 little groups, and by the time we actually won the ban, we were more than 500 groups, and some of those, like Faith Leaders Against Fracking, represented themselves 500 different churches and synagogues. So we became sort of like the mighty little engine, and we were our governor's political base, and he was being primary to his left, and suddenly the science all became clear to him. So that was a real lesson for me. And I'll talk about this tomorrow in my political panel, how science can be carried into a good objective science, right? Can be carried into the political arena as part of a social movement. And you don't, my argument will be tomorrow, that you don't lose scientific objectivity in so doing, right? That you can still know how to look at statistical stability and confidence intervals and p-values. You're doing all that work, but at the end of the day, if the objective analysis shows that we're going down, that people are going to get hurt and species are going extinct or drinking water is at risk, then you need a political movement to carry that data into the frontline communities, but also into the halls of power. So I'll talk more about that tomorrow. That story is also in the film. You saw the clip of what I was arrested for, which was not fracking per se, but gas storage operations in underground salt caverns near Seneca Lake. That was a 2.5-year civil disobedience movement. More than 650 local people were arrested. We won. The company now is not going to be storing natural gas there. And then the third scene you saw was from Romania, that old woman who's chucking a piece of sod at the military police who's serving as private security for Chevron. They also won their battle. So it's a victorious film that shows 3 different battles where people kind of fought with their whole heart in different ways and won. So I hope it's a story that will kind of dispel some of the defeatism and case of the vapors that too many people have when they think about the story of climate change. So that's it. Thank you.